Unit 2, Developmental Psychology. Presentation 7, The Impact of Daycare on Social Behaviour. Aggression.
The term daycare refers to situations where parents place their preschool children in someone else's care during the day while they go out to work. Examples include childminding, where someone looks after children in the childminder's own home, or a day nursery where lots of children go to a place a bit like a school, or having a nanny in your own home. Essentially, daycare is care by anyone other than a child's own parents. This presentation is concerned with the effects of daycare on aggressive behaviour.
A number of studies have found that daycare is linked to increased aggression in children. Perhaps one of the largest studies is the American NICHD study, which stands for the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, but NICHD is fine. The NICHD study has been going on since 1991 and involves over 1,000 American children from a range of different families and locations. Reports are regularly made on the development of the children in the sample. When the children were tested at the age of 5, the researchers found that the more time children had spent in daycare, the more likely they were to be rated as assertive, disobedient and aggressive.
They compared children in full-time daycare to those cared for by their mothers at home, and found that the daycare children were about 3 times more likely to show behaviour problems, such as arguing, temper tantrums, lying and hitting.
Perhaps most importantly, they found there was a critical threshold. Those children who averaged more than 30 hours per week in daycare were more likely to show problem behaviours when they went to school. Less than 30 hours a week seemed to not cause such major problems.
Another study, this time in the UK, has found similar results. This is the EPPE, or EPI study.
EPPE stands for Effective Provision of Preschool Education.
This study involved over 3,000 children and found that high levels of daycare, particularly nursery care before the age of 2, increased the risk of developing antisocial or aggressive behaviour when children spent more than 40 hours a week being cared for.
We can also consider the other side of aggressive behaviour. In other words, non-aggressive behaviour, or general socialness.
There are many studies which link attendance at daycare with no aggression. For example, Alison Clark Stewart and colleagues studied 150 children and found that those who were in daycare were consistently more advanced in their social development than children who stayed at home with their mothers. These advances were in independence, dinner-time obedience, compliance requests, and social interactions with peers.
Evaluating research on the effects of daycare on aggression.
There have been a number of criticisms of the conclusions drawn from the NICHD study. First of all, the NICHD study results can also be used to show that daycare is not associated with aggressiveness. Friedman pointed out that if you look at the data from the NICHD study on children attending daycare for less than 30 hours per week, 83% of these children did not show higher levels of aggression compared with non-daycare children. This underlies the importance of looking carefully at the findings of a research study, which the media often fails to do.
This brings us to a second criticism of the conclusions. The NICHD study deals with correlations. In fact, most of the research on this topic deals with correlations. It's a mistake, therefore, to presume that the daycare has caused the aggressiveness. There are other factors that might cause both of these variables. For example, children spending more than 30 hours on average per week in daycare tend to come from homes where, for one reason or another, mothers have less time or energy to spend with their children. Therefore, the children's background could be the cause of their increased aggression rather than it being caused by daycare.
In fact, to support this idea, the NICHD research also found that a mother's sensitivity to her child was a better indicator of reported problem behaviours than was time in daycare. In other words, the mother's behaviour was more likely to cause the child's aggressiveness than was the time spent in daycare.
A different approach to evaluation can be taken by considering the factors that moderate the effects of daycare. Moderate refers to factors that might reduce or increase aggressiveness. First, there is the issue of the quality of daycare. The NICHD study found that low quality care was associated with poor social development, so increased aggressiveness might be avoided if the quality of daycare was improved. For example, by having a better staff-to-child ratio or a more stimulating environment.
Second, there is the issue of individual differences. It seems obvious that some children will find daycare more difficult or unpleasant than others. For example, research by Jay Belsky has found that shy children find the experience more overwhelming and distressing. Such children might express their difficulties by acting out or becoming more aggressive.
And finally, there is the matter of the amount of time spent in daycare. The NICHD study found that it was an important factor identifying 30 hours a week as a critical cutoff. In other words, children spending more than 30 hours a week in daycare experience negative effects, whereas those spending less than 30 hours in daycare did not have negative effects.
On the other hand, Clark Stewart didn't find that number of hours in daycare was significant. No matter how long the children were spending in daycare, she found no negative effects. If anything, there were positive effects.
What can we conclude about the effects of daycare on aggressiveness? It looks like daycare cannot be seen as a direct cause of aggression. Even if it is sometimes linked with aggression, there are a number of other factors that might moderate this effect, such as quality of daycare and time spent in daycare. It is worth focusing on these moderating factors in order to improve the daycare experience for children.